All right, well, you guys, first of all, pop in at any time. If you have a question, just let me know. I'll try. I don't think tonight's class is going to be like a million hours long. We'll try to keep it condensed because it's really just an introduction to what we're going to be talking about and a few of the basics for conflict management and conflict resolution. So we're going to jump right in. I don't need to introduce myself because I know all of you. I was going to do that, but you know me. Hi. So yeah, let's get started. I really wanted to start with a memory verse about peacemaking. I bet most of you probably know the one I'm about to quote, but it is, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." We used that verse a lot during my studies because it had peacemakers in it, and that's kind of a big deal for us. I want to talk a little bit about what it means to be a peacemaker and what it means to be a child of God and what those two look like together. So we'll do this example. If someone sees George dressed up like Spider-Man, they think, oh, that must be a child of Chris Perry. If someone sees us being a peacemaker, hopefully they're going to think, oh, that must be a child of God. So basically what it is we are doing by being peacemakers is taking on the qualities of God that are valuable. So as a peacemaker, we are blessed to be called children of God. Everyone, of course, is a child of God. I don't need to tell you that, but this specific verse is, what are the things that I'm doing that make me look like a child of God, that remind other people of what that looks like? And peacemaking is one of them. So I touched on this a little bit in our little roundtable discussion on Sunday, but what does it mean to be a peacemaker versus a peacekeeper? And peacekeepers ignore the conflict. They avoid it, or they might even try to convince people that it doesn't exist because they don't want to disrupt their quiet world, their peaceful little world. So that's what a peacekeeper does. They avoid, they ignore, they deny that a conflict is there. A peacemaker, someone who's willing to tackle that conflict head on. It's someone who is willing to kind of work through that, and someone who's willing to acknowledge the conflict, because by acknowledging it and working through it, that's how peace is actually created, like a real peace, a good peace, not just quiet, not just nobody saying the opposite of what you're trying to say, like an actual restful feeling in your body and in your life. You know, Jesus actually stirred up quite a bit of trouble in the name of his perfect peace, because his peace isn't blind. His peace isn't an easy peace, but it was a peace that was worth the effort. It was a true peace, and resolving conflict is a lot like that. It takes some effort, but it's totally worth it because it leads to that real peace, that good peace. So with that in mind, my goal over the next several weeks is to give you a better understanding of yourself in conflict, who you are and where you come from when you approach conflict. I'm also going to give you some tools to navigate that conflict, and hopefully that will give you the confidence to be a peacemaker, to be someone who's not afraid to approach conflict, and someone that can actually work through it and grow from it, because there is growth that comes from conflict. It's not inherently bad. This class is not going to teach you how to avoid conflict, because as long as there are people on this world, there's going to be conflict, because even though we are beloved children of God, sometimes we're kind of the worst and we kind of cause conflict a little bit, but that's okay. All right, so let's get started. I want you to think to yourself for a moment, and you don't have to answer this question. I just want you to think, when is the last time you had a conflict with someone? How did it go? Was it resolved? Is it still happening? Is it something you're just kind of pushing away for another day? Or is it one of those things where you look back and think, I would have done this differently? Or could I have just avoided this conflict overall? So I thought of a few examples or conflict, things that make you angry. You're driving down the highway and somebody cuts you off. Your neighbor's dog will never stop barking and they won't do anything about it. You need to break up with somebody. Your liberal or conservative relative has brought up politics again. Your child has broken curfew again. Your mother-in-law is constantly nitpicking how you raise your children. Teresa Perry is awesome. She is not a nitpicker. Let me throw that out there right now. I'm just saying, I know some mother-in-laws who tend to do that a little bit. Or maybe your dad keeps a steady stream of negative comments directed at you. Again, not my dad. Love you, Dad. You're the best. But there are dads that do that. So these are kind of some examples of maybe everyday conflicts that might happen in your life, or also repetitive conflicts. So it's like, you don't see your in-laws all the time. Some of you are lucky enough to, but not everyone does. But the same stuff comes up every time you get together. That's like a continuous conflict that hasn't been fixed yet. These are the kinds of conflict that I want us to be able to learn how to work through. Because a lot of these things are the seeds of conflict. These tiny things are the seeds that create a larger conflict. At face value, it might seem kind of trivial. And of course, that depends on what side of the conflict that you are on. Depending on what side of the conflict you're on is going to depend on how important or unimportant you think this is. Truthfully, no one is going to get into a conflict over something that does not matter to them. It might not matter to you, but it matters to them. And that's a very important thing to remember when you're in conflict with someone, is no one's going to pick a fight just to pick a fight. Something is wrong and something needs to be fixed. I think that's one of the reasons why conflict is probably so scary. It's intimidating. At its core, conflict is about human emotion. It makes us vulnerable, and it can be personal when we put ourselves out there or when we're ignored or anything like that. Anger, fear, embarrassment, inferiority, these are kind of a lot of the emotions that we can feel that can be at the root at whatever conflict is taking place right now or in your life. And a lot of times in that conflict, we're not even aware that it's those emotions that are driving that conflict. That's something that hopefully you guys will be more in tune to by the end of our class session overall. I had mentioned that maybe a recent conflict you've been in could have been avoided. And I talk a lot about avoiding conflict and how you don't want to. There are some conflicts that can be avoided if you just, take out the trash or, whatever. But conflict cannot be avoided. Conflicts can maybe be fixed, avoided, whatever, pretty easily. But overall conflict is something that cannot. But it doesn't have to be painful. Okay? It can be life-giving when all is said and done. So there are 3 mistakes that we as people tend to make in conflict. I like to call these the triple A's of conflict. And I'm going to talk about these every single week because I feel like they're just that important as some of those building blocks for learning how to be a peacemaker. So the triple A's of conflict: acting like you are right, assigning blame, and assuming intention. So your triple A's: acting like you are right, assigning blame, and assuming intention. So let's talk about those three for a moment. Acting like you're right is the first one. I'm right, you're wrong. No big deal. Just listen to me and let's get it taken care of. This is an easy trap to fall into because everyone comes at a conflict thinking they're right. So why is it that when you are coming into a conflict, that person is wrong and you are right? That person is the naive one. That person is the selfish one, or the irrational one, or the controlling one. Why is it that we think that we are not the problem in this conflict? A lot of that comes from the fact that conflict is rarely about getting the facts right. It's not about the facts, because everyone brings a different perception and information to the table, because what we notice has to do with the things that we care about. So when you're coming into a conflict thinking that other person is wrong, then you're coming into a conflict to just get the facts straight. And it's not always about what is right. It's not always about what is true, but it's about what is important. And what's important is getting to the why is the conflict happening and how did it get to this point? It's not about the what is making this conflict happen. So that's acting like you're right. You act like you're right, the other person's wrong. They're not going to listen to you and you're not going to listen to them, and that gets you nowhere. So that's the first mistake that we tend to make. The second is assigning blame. Blame is very easy to assign because it lets us off the hook. If it's someone else's fault, it doesn't have to be ours. So when those in conflict focus on who is to blame, who is right, and who is wrong, they're actually blinding themselves to the more important questions are why things went wrong and how it can be corrected going forward. I've said that a couple of times just because it's a really important thing to think about. You don't want to think about the who is to blame. You want to think about the why it went wrong and how it can be corrected. That is coming to conflict in a good way. Assigning blame, not so good. So instead of assigning blame and focusing on the who, you focus on the how you contributed to the conflict. Assigning blame is about judging, but considering your contribution to the conflict is about understanding. And ultimately, that's going to be one of the healing factors in conflict is understanding. I say this to George all the time, but we can only control how we respond to any situation. We cannot control what other people do, how other people are going to act. So the sooner we can own up to that fact, the sooner we can stop assigning blame to other people for the conflict or the problems we're having and start figuring out how we contributed to that conflict. And that's where a lot of the growth from conflict comes in, when you start recognizing your part in that conflict. And of course, there are exceptions, but we'll talk about those in a couple of weeks. So that's the second one, assigning blame. And then we have assuming intention. And this is a biggie for me, assuming intention, because it's something we do automatically. We don't even think about it, which is interesting because intentions are invisible. We don't know a person's intention until it is spoken. We don't know their motivations. We don't know the why they're doing what they're doing. We're just making assumptions as to why they're doing what they're doing. So like, that person yelled at me because they wanted to hurt my feelings or belittle me. Or like maybe they were just trying to make their point, or maybe they were just impassioned about the things that they were trying to say. That person cut me off in the grocery store line. They are entitled and rude, or they're absent-minded and weren't paying attention. Like I have actually done that before. Just, in my own little world, walked into line, cut in front of like 3 people, and nobody stopped me. But I realized after I paid that I had done that. It's fine, whatever. Anyway, yeah, maybe they're just absent-minded and they're just kind of in their own little world. Assuming attention, in my opinion, is probably one of the biggest contributors to conflict, because as I had said, we don't even know that we're doing it. So already we're coming into a conflict assuming a fact that we don't know. And another thing about intentions that I find interesting is we are so quick to offer ourselves grace in conflict, yet even quicker to assign judgment to the other person. So we know why we did the thing that we did. We know that we were just absent-minded and cut in front of the person at the grocery store. We know that. So we assign ourselves grace, but the other person doesn't know that. And when someone does it to us, we assume it's because they're entitled and rude. But we're just giving them we're attributing external factors to theirs because we don't know their motivations. For example, you're driving down the highway and somebody cuts you off. So what do? You might get all mad. You might not care. You might honk your horn. You might wave with a certain finger from your hand. I don't know how you deal with stuff like that. That's between you and I guess God. But you just think, what a jerk. He just cut me off for no reason. But when you do it, it's because, oh man, my turn is right there and I'm almost forgetting to take it. And so you like swerve real quickly to cut it. You cut somebody off and they're honk or horn or give you the bird or whatever. And you're like I was so rude. All I was doing was trying to get to my exit. So you're offering yourself so much grace, but you don't extend that grace when it happens to you on the opposite side. The reason why intentions are so important is because what you think about your intentions, what I think, okay, got it, I'm back. What I think about your intentions will affect how I think about you. So whatever I assume your intentions are, I am assuming something about you, and ultimately that's how the conflict's gonna go. So if I think you're out to attack me or prove me wrong or embarrass me, then I am much less likely to hear anything you are saying to me, which will then leave the conflict unresolved. Does that make sense? You have to give the benefit of the doubt. This is one of the things that I think my mom pounded into my brain from a very early age, because anytime I would gripe about somebody, she would be like, you don't know where they're coming from. They're one of God's creatures too. You don't know what's going on at home or what's going on in their life. I'm like, okay, whatever, mom, blah, 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 blah. I'm grateful for it now. Thanks, mom. But the benefit of the doubt is kind of a big deal when you're coming into conflict. So if you approach a conflict thinking, okay, this person must really care about what it is that we're in conflict over, I should take the time to hear what they have to say about it. It might not be as bad as I think. Maybe they're not trying to embarrass me. Maybe they're just trying to be heard. So how you come to the conflict, if you give them the benefit of the doubt, you're giving them good intentions. You're giving them that same grace that you give yourself when you're in conflict. So those are your triple A's. I just forgot the first one. Assigning blame, assuming intention, and
acting like you're right.
Acting like you're right. Good job, guys. That was a test. You all passed. So conflict is really layered. And that's what makes it so complicated. It is layered. It's layered with person's perceptions. It's layered with their individual experiences. It's labeled with their personal emotions. And it's always changing because we as humans are always changing. Every day we take in a new experience, we take in a new emotion that's applied to something different. And so how we view things and the way that we approach things, whereas will be about the same, it also it will be a bit of an evolving emotion. Excuse me. It's complicated, but it is conquerable. Like it's a doable thing to work through conflict. As I had said, I'm not going to teach you how to avoid conflict, but I will help equip you to navigate it a bit better. And we're actually going to start that with a little bit of self-awareness. So before any of you guys leave tonight, actually meant to do this before and just forgot. I'm going to, in the conversations, I'm going to include a little quiz kind of thing, a little survey type of deal that's going to take you about 15 minutes to do. And what it is it's going to help you figure out your conflict style, whether you're an avoider, whether you're a competitor, a compromiser, a collaborator. It's going to help you figure that out. So what I would really like for you to do is maybe when we're done tonight, take an extra 15 minutes and go ahead and get it filled out. And you'll be able to score it yourself. So that next week, when you come to class, you'll have your conflict style. And I'm going to talk about each one of those because the journey to healthy conflict starts with self-awareness. And I've done this survey several times, and so I've scored it several times. So I think it's a pretty simple scoring system, but if you're having trouble with it, don't worry about it. Just let me know, shoot me a text, an email. You can screenshot it on your phones, anything like that. If you need some help figuring it out, or if you have some questions about anything, I think it's gonna serve you well, knowing kind of where your home base is, where you fall when you are dealing with conflict. I can't find the conflicts section, so I'm going to have Chris come in here and do that here in a second. And if that doesn't work, then I will make sure and get it emailed to you, or we'll get it to you guys somehow. We might just send it out in a church email or something like that. It should only take about 15 minutes.
Chris attached it to something today. I can't remember if it was on email or if it was on Facebook, but I got it, the link.
Oh, wow, you have it? Oh, great. That
I know.
He's so
Yes.
good. I think I'll keep him. All right, good job, Chris. Well, if for some reason he didn't, we'll get it to you guys. Don't worry about that. I also have, well, I guess, does anybody have any questions about anything we've talked about so far? Anything they want me to speak on in a little more depth, or did I just like knock it out of the park and you guys are so smart now?
Pretty much it.
Dad, you don't count. I know I threw a lot at you in the first session, but hopefully you'll be able to digest it over the next week. The thing that I really want you to take away is the AAAs of conflict, the importance of the benefit of the doubt in conflict. Those are probably the biggest things that I want to make sure that you remember. I do have a book that you can read if you want. It is called Difficult Conversations, and it is by Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen. You don't have to read this book to take this class. It's not going to affect what you know and what you learn in the next 6 weeks, but I have found it to be an extremely useful tool for me through the years. I've got a lot of things highlighted and dog-eared. That person sometimes. I'm dog-earing pages just so that I can reference them pretty easily. But I feel like this book is a really great book just for more interpersonal kinds of conflict, but it can also apply to the workplace as well. But I just have really appreciated the way they've approached conflict, and a lot of the concepts that I'm going to discuss and a lot of the the points that I'm going to be bringing up will come in one way or the other from this book. So if you are an overachiever and you want to read that book, I'm looking at you, Ellie Hire. You can, and I don't think that you'll regret it. Even if you just kind of skim through, you find a chapter that feels interesting, and you go for it. So so that's that. Well, that was only 30 minutes, but I'm done.
Talk about like acting like you're right, but what's the difference when you know you're right?
When you know you're right, well, that's an interesting thing, Gary, we might need to talk about later.
Okay.
So, so you can come into an argument knowing that you're right and that they are wrong. Like, that is an actual thing. So I think the important thing to remember in that is, even if they are wrong, why do they feel so passionately about it? So again, it's not about getting those facts right. It's about, why are we in this conflict over it, even if I am right? Because there's some things that are just right and there are some things that are just wrong. But conflict isn't about the facts. It's about the emotions behind why there's a conflict. It's the why and the how. Not the so.
Strange things.
So I think that's the most important thing to remember, because a lot of times what you're fighting over isn't the root of the conflict. It's something entirely different. Somebody can be fighting over money that belonged to, I don't know, a family member, and they fight and fight and fight. Neither of them actually need it, but they want it because their entire life they've felt like they weren't worthy. And if they win this battle and get this thing, maybe they'll feel some value within themselves. It's that kind of thing. So it's the motivation behind why there's a conflict. And eventually, rightness will come to light, but hopefully growth for both parties will also be a part of that process.
Thanks.
Well, you're welcome. Any other questions?
Would you say that these 3 A's or whatever change in cases of like chronic conflict, in the sense that like there's recurring pattern of people maybe being abusive or something in a relationship where you can begin to assign blame, or even if their intentions are unspoken, there's a pattern that's formed? Does that change at all?
Yes, yeah, it does. There are exceptions to those AAA. So these AAAs, you're going to apply to just like your run-of-the-mill stuff. If there's abuse in a relationship, if there's legitimate emotional or physical damage that's happening, then I think the more important thing to focus on is removing yourself from that conflict. And removing yourself from a conflict isn't necessarily avoiding it when it can save a life, or when it can, I will talk about this in one of the later sessions, but a lot of times some conflict, the relationship is more important than the conflict that's being had. And so you kind of have to weigh, what it is that matters to you the most versus what it is you're willing to give on a little bit. I mean, that's just kind of like in any relationship, there's kind of a give and a take there. And the same thing comes with conflict. That's why it's so important to understand who you are in conflict, so that you can recognize a little bit better, what's the conflict I can deal with and what's something that I need help with, or what's something that I need to remove myself away from. Does that answer your question a little bit? We will touch on that more in the later weeks.